In a universe where dragons are bought and sold like livestock, where their magnificent forms are reduced to credit values and their ancient wisdom dismissed as primitive instinct, one small dragon waited in the darkest corner of the cheapest stall. 3 credits. That's all anyone thought it was worth. But dragons remember everything. They remember when humans first looked up at the stars with wonder instead of greed. They remember the old contracts written in starfire and sealed with respect. Most of all, they remember the difference between a master who demands submission and a friend who offers partnership. The galaxy was about to remember too. When Jake Morrison, a down-on-his-luck mechanic with oil-stained hands and a heart bigger than his bank account, walked into that alien marketplace, he had no idea he was about to make the most important purchase in human history. He didn't know that his simple act of kindness would ripple across star systems, topple empires, and prove that humans weren't just another conquering species. He just saw a creature that needed help. Sometimes, the smallest acts of decency echo the loudest across the cosmos. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his grease-stained hand, leaving another dark smudge across his already dirty face. The repair shop on station Kepler 442b hummed with the constant noise of machinery, but today felt different. Today felt like the end of something. Another rejection, he muttered, crumpling the electronic notice that had just appeared on his workstation screen. The Galactic Mechanics Guild had denied his application for advanced certification again. Not enough credits for the training program. Not enough connections. Not enough of anything that mattered in this corner of space. Jake looked around his small workshop. The tools were old but well-maintained, each one carefully cleaned and organized. The workbench bore the scars of countless repairs, metal worn smooth by years of honest work. But honest work didn't pay much anymore, not when the big corporate fleets had their own automated repair systems and the independent ships were getting fewer every year. His stomach growled, reminding him that breakfast had been yesterday and lunch was looking doubtful. 3 credits. That's what he had left to his name after paying this month's rent on the shop. 3 credits wouldn't buy much more than a stale nutrition bar from the vending machines near the docking bay. The door chimed as someone entered. Jake turned, expecting to see old Mrs. Chen with her cargo hauler that needed its engines tuned again, but instead found himself looking at a tall, blue-skinned alien he didn't recognize. The being wore expensive clothes and carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone who had never worried about where his next meal was coming from. "You are the human mechanic, yes?" the alien asked in accented standard. His voice carried undertones that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable speaking the universal language. "That's me," Jake replied, standing straighter despite his exhaustion. "Jake Morrison. What can I do for you?" The alien looked around the workshop with barely concealed disdain. "I am Veltar of the Centauri Trade Consortium. I have a proposal that might interest someone in your circumstances." Jake bristled at the condescension but kept his voice level. "I'm listening. There is an exotic animal market in the lower levels of this station. Today only, they are conducting a special sale. Creatures that have not sold in the standard auctions." Veltar's large eyes glittered with something Jake couldn't quite identify. "I am authorized to offer you a small sum to purchase one particular creature for my employers. The details are not important, but the pay would be substantial." "How substantial?" 5,000 credits. Jake's breath caught. 5,000 credits would cover his rent for months, buy new tools, maybe even afford that certification program. "What's the catch?" Veltar's expression didn't change. "No catch. Simply purchase the creature and deliver it to the specified location. The beast is worthless to most buyers, which is why it remains unsold. But my employers have particular interests." Something in the alien's tone made Jake's skin crawl. He had worked on the fringes of galactic civilization long enough to recognize when someone was being deliberately vague about their intentions. "What kind of creature?" "A dragon. A young one. Perhaps 3 of your human years in age." Veltar reached into his coat and produced a small device that projected a holographic image. "This one, specifically." Jake stared at the hologram. The dragon was small, maybe the size of a large dog, with scales that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue. Its eyes were the most striking feature, intelligent and ancient despite its apparent youth. Even in the static image, Jake could see something that looked like sadness in those golden orbs. Dragons are sentient, Jake said slowly. They're protected under Galactic Convention 447. Only adult dragons are protected, Veltar corrected smoothly. Juveniles are classified as exotic animals until they reach maturity. Perfectly legal to own, trade, or dispose of as one sees fit. The way he said dispose of made Jake's stomach turn. What do your employers want with it? That is not your concern. Will you accept the commission or not? I can easily find another human to make the purchase if you are not interested. Jake looked around his workshop again. At the overdue bills stacked on his desk. At the empty refrigeration unit in the corner where he used to keep real food instead of cheap ration packs. At the certification rejection still glowing on his screen. 5,000 credits would change everything. But the dragon in the hologram looked so small, so vulnerable. And there was something about Veltar's careful word choices that suggested the creature's fate would not be pleasant. I need to think about it, Jake said finally. Veltar's expression hardened slightly. The market closes in 2 hours. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Morrison? If you do decide to take a look at the market, you might find it educational. Humans have such interesting reactions to seeing how the rest of the galaxy treats its property. After the alien left, Jake sat heavily on his workstool and stared at the holographic projector Veltar had left behind. The dragon gazed back at him, and, for a moment Jake could have sworn he saw intelligence in those golden eyes, as if the creature was somehow aware it was being watched. He thought about his father, who had taught him that a person's character was defined not by what they did when others were watching, but by what they did when no one would ever know. His father had been a mechanic too, back on Earth, before the family had moved to the outer colonies in search of better opportunities. A tool is only as good as the hands that wield it, his father used to say. But a person is only as good as the choices they make when those hands are empty. Jake's hands felt very empty right now. Against his better judgment, he found himself walking toward the lower levels of the station. The exotic animal market was in a section most humans avoided, where the artificial gravity was slightly off and the air recyclers couldn't quite mask the smell of too many different species crowded together. The market was exactly as depressing as he had imagined. Cages lined narrow corridors, each containing creatures from across the galaxy. Most of the animals looked miserable, their natural behaviors constrained by too small enclosures and inadequate care. Vendors called out prices and supposed pedigrees, treating living beings like merchandise to be moved quickly before spoilage set in. Jake walked through the maze of stalls, his heart growing heavier with each step. He saw creatures that should have been swimming in vast oceans crammed into tanks barely large enough for them to turn around. Birds whose wings had been clipped so they couldn't fly were stacked in tiny cages, their songs reduced to pitiful chirps of distress. And then, he found the dragon. It was in the very last stall, in the darkest corner of the market where the overhead lights flickered intermittently. The creature was even smaller in person than it had appeared in the hologram, curled up in a cage that might have been appropriate for a house cat. Its scales were dull with neglect, and Jake could count its ribs through the thin skin of its flanks. The vendor was a squat, orange-skinned being with too many eyes and a voice like grinding metal. You interested in the little drake, human? Been trying to move it for weeks. Can't understand why no one wants it. Used to be dragons were valued for their labor potential, but this one's defective. Won't bond with anyone, won't follow commands. Practically useless. How much? Jake asked, surprised by how hoarse his own voice sounded. Well, originally I was asking 50 credits, but I'm motivated to clear inventory. Tell you what, human, you can have it for 3 credits. Probably die anyway without proper care, and I don't have the facilities. 3 credits. The last of Jake's money. The difference between eating today and going hungry. The dragon lifted its head and looked directly at him. Those golden eyes held depths that seemed impossible in such a young creature. There was pain there, and loneliness, but also something else. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps Jake was just projecting his own desperate optimism onto an animal that couldn't understand its situation. "Does it have a name?" Jake asked. The vendor's laugh was like nails on metal. "A name? It's property, human. Might as well name your shoes." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his 3 remaining credits. The last of his money. His final chance at that 5,000 credit payday if he just walked away and called Veltar. Instead, he handed the credits to the vendor. "I'll take him." The vendor looked surprised but pleased. "Your loss, human. Don't come crying to me when the thing dies on you." As Jake carefully lifted the small dragon from its cage, he felt how light it was, how its bones pressed against his hands through skin and scale. The creature didn't struggle or try to bite. Instead, it looked up at Jake with those ancient golden eyes and made a sound that was barely audible, like a sigh of relief. "Easy there, buddy," Jake whispered, cradling the dragon against his chest. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The walk back to his workshop felt like the longest journey of his life. Every step took him further from financial security and deeper into an uncertain future. He had no idea how to care for a dragon. He had no money for food, for veterinary care, for anything the creature might need. But, as he felt the small body relax against him, as he heard the faint rumbling that might have been the dragon equivalent of a purr, Jake knew he had made the right choice. His father would have been proud. The workshop felt different when he returned, warmer somehow despite the fact that nothing had changed. Jake set up a makeshift bed for the dragon in the corner, using old shop rags and a heating element from a broken engine. The creature seemed fascinated by the tools and machinery, its golden eyes tracking every detail with obvious intelligence. "You're not just property, are you?" Jake said softly as he offered the dragon a small piece of the nutrition bar that should have been his dinner. "There's something special about you." The dragon accepted the food delicately, its small claws careful not to scratch Jake's fingers. Then, it did something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It bowed its head. Not the submissive gesture of a trained animal, but the respectful acknowledgement of one intelligent being recognizing another. In that moment, Jake understood that he hadn't rescued the dragon at all. The dragon had chosen him. Outside his workshop, the station continued its endless cycle of commerce and ambition. Ships came and went, carrying cargo and passengers across the galaxy in pursuit of profit and power. Somewhere in the luxury levels above, Veltar was probably already arranging for another human to make his purchase. But, in a small repair shop in the depths of station Kepler 442b, a broke mechanic and a 3-credit dragon were beginning a partnership that would change the course of history. They just didn't know it yet. Jake spent the evening watching his new companion explore the workshop with obvious curiosity. The dragon seemed particularly interested in the complex machinery, studying each tool with an intensity that suggested understanding rather than mere animal curiosity. When Jake finally settled down to sleep on the old couch he kept in the corner for long repair jobs, the dragon curled up nearby, close enough to provide comfort but respectful of personal space. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. He had no money, no job prospects, and now a dependent creature to care for. By any reasonable measure, he had made the worst possible decision. So why did he feel, for the first time in months, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be? In the morning, everything would change. But, tonight, in the quiet darkness of his workshop, Jake Morrison slept peacefully while a young dragon kept watch, golden eyes reflecting the soft glow of the workbench lights. Neither of them knew that their simple act of mutual respect had just set in motion events that would ripple across the stars. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of when they chose compassion over profit. And it was about to discover that dragons, even 3-credit dragons, had very long memories indeed. Jake woke to the sound of soft scratching and discovered his new companion had managed to fix the broken atmospheric recycler that had been giving him trouble for weeks. The dragon sat beside the now humming machine, its golden eyes bright with what Jake could only describe as satisfaction. "How did you?" Jake started, then stopped. The access panel had been carefully removed and set aside. The burnt-out circuit board that should have cost him 50 credits to replace had been somehow repaired, its damaged pathways seemingly restored by minute applications of what looked like controlled electrical discharge. The dragon tilted its head and made a soft trilling sound that Jake was beginning to recognize as contentment. Over the past 3 days since bringing the creature home, Jake had started to notice patterns in the dragon's vocalizations. Different sounds for different emotions, almost like a language. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Jake said, kneeling down to examine the repair work more closely. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far beyond what he could have managed with his limited tools. "Where did you learn to do this?" The dragon's response was a complex series of chirps and whistles that Jake wished he could understand. But, even without translation, he could hear the loneliness in the sounds. This creature had knowledge, skills, and intelligence that rivaled or exceeded his own, but no way to communicate the depth of what it knew. Jake had named the dragon Ember, partly for the way its scales seemed to glow with inner fire when it was happy, and partly because it seemed to spark with electrical energy when working on machinery. Ember had taken to the name immediately, responding with excited trills whenever Jake used it. The past few days had been a revelation. Despite having no money for proper dragon food, Jake had watched Ember thrive on a diet of mineral supplements and the occasional treat from the station's hydroponics bay. The dragon seemed to subsist as much on the electrical fields from the workshop's equipment as on actual food, often curling up near the power conduits with a blissful expression. More importantly, Ember had proven to be an extraordinary helper. The dragon's small size allowed it to access tight spaces in machinery that Jake couldn't reach, while its apparent ability to sense electrical problems made diagnostics incredibly efficient. What used to take Jake hours of troubleshooting now took minutes. They had developed a working rhythm that felt natural, almost telepathic. Jake would start a repair, and Ember would somehow anticipate what tools or parts were needed, fetching them with careful precision. The dragon never got in the way, never damaged anything, and seemed to understand complex mechanical principles that should have been far beyond its apparent age. But the most remarkable thing was how Ember treated him. Not as a master or owner, but as a partner. An equal. The dragon would offer suggestions through gesture and sound, wait for Jake's approval before making repairs, and always deferred to Jake's expertise even when it was clear that Ember's knowledge might be superior. It was that respect, that acknowledgement of partnership rather than ownership, that made everything else possible. Jake was just finishing his morning coffee when the workshop door chimed. He looked up to see Captain Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, standing in the doorway with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Jake, I need your help," she said without preamble. "Mom's ship is critical. Main engine shutting down randomly, and none of the automated diagnostics can figure out why. I've got a cargo run to Proxima Station that I can't miss, or I'll lose my shipping contract." Jake nodded, already reaching for his toolkit. "When did the problem start?" 2 days ago. Started small, just minor power fluctuations. But this morning the engine died completely about 5 minutes after startup." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I've already missed one delivery. I can't afford to miss another." Jake knew the Chen family's situation. Sarah was trying to keep the family shipping business afloat after her father's death, while caring for her aging mother and younger brother. Losing their shipping contract would mean losing everything. "Bring her into Bay 3, Jake said. "Ember and I will take a look." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Ember?" Jake gestured to the dragon, who had been watching the conversation with obvious interest. "My new partner." Sarah stared at the small dragon for a moment, then shrugged. Desperation had a way of making people flexible about unusual help. "Whatever works, Jake. I'm running out of options." The Chen family's cargo hauler was a vintage Stellar Dynamics freighter, the kind of ship that had been reliable workhorses for decades but was now showing its age. Jake had worked on it before, but never with a problem this intermittent and mysterious. He ran his standard diagnostics while Ember explored the engine compartment with obvious fascination. The readings all came back within normal parameters, but Jake could see the stress fractures in the power couplings that suggested the ship was operating under significant strain. "Nothing obvious on the surface scans," Jake told Sarah, who was pacing nervously beside the ship. "I'm going to need to go deeper into the engine core." That's when Ember began making agitated noises. The dragon was at the far end of the engine compartment, near the primary power distribution hub, chittering urgently and gesturing with its small claws. Jake crawled over to where Ember was pointing and immediately saw the problem. A microscopic crack in the quantum containment field generator, invisible to standard scanners but apparently obvious to Dragon's senses. The crack was causing random fluctuations in the power flow, which explained the intermittent failures. "How did you spot that?" Jake muttered, then, louder, "Sarah, I found it. But, I have to tell you, this repair is going to cost more than the ship is worth. You need a new quantum containment unit, and those run about 15,000 credits." Sarah's face went white. "I don't have 15,000 credits. I barely have 15 credits. Jake stared at the damaged component, his mind racing. The part itself was relatively simple, just a crystalline matrix that maintained quantum stability in the engine core. With the right equipment and materials, it could theoretically be repaired rather than replaced. But the equipment needed for that kind of precision work cost more than he made in a year, and the materials were restricted to licensed facilities with proper safety certifications. Ember chirped softly and moved closer to the damaged unit. The dragon's scales began to glow with that inner fire Jake had noticed before, and the air around them suddenly smelled of ozone. "Ember, no," Jake said quickly. "That's quantum-level stuff. It's dangerous." But Ember looked up at him with those golden eyes, and Jake saw something there that stopped his protest. Confidence. Knowledge. The same expression he had seen when the dragon repaired his atmospheric recycler, but magnified. Ember knew what it was doing. Jake glanced at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with growing hope despite not fully understanding what she was seeing. He thought about the Chen family's situation, about the cargo contract that meant the difference between survival and bankruptcy for them. He thought about his father's words about character being defined by choices made when no one was watching. "All right, Ember," Jake said quietly. "But we do this together. Show me what you need." What followed was the most extraordinary repair work Jake had ever witnessed. Ember's small claws moved with microscopic precision, somehow manipulating quantum fields that should have required massive industrial equipment to even detect. The dragon's scales pulsed with controlled energy discharges, each one precisely calibrated to repair damaged crystal lattices at the molecular level. But it wasn't just raw power. Ember constantly looked to Jake for guidance, waiting for nods of approval before making each adjustment. The dragon was sharing its knowledge, teaching Jake techniques that shouldn't have been possible with their limited tools. Jake found himself understanding principles of quantum mechanics that had been theoretical concepts just hours before. Ember was somehow downloading knowledge directly into his mind, not through telepathy or magic, but through demonstration and shared experience. 3 hours later, they had not only repaired the quantum containment unit but improved it. The crystal matrix now hummed with perfect stability, generating a power curve that was actually better than factory specifications. "Diagnostic shows all systems green," Sarah announced from the cockpit, her voice thick with amazement. "Jake, the power output is reading 20% above normal maximum. How is that possible?" Jake looked at Ember, who was now curled up in exhaustion from the precision work. "Let's just say my partner has some unexpected talents." Sarah insisted on paying for the repair, despite Jake's protests that he had mostly just provided tools while Ember did the real work. When she pressed a credit chip containing 500 credits into his hand, Jake felt a mixture of pride and confusion. "This is too much," he said. "The materials cost maybe 50 credits. "The materials, maybe," Sarah replied. "But you just saved my family's business. 500 credits is nothing compared to losing that shipping contract." After Sarah left with her fully functional freighter, Jake sat in his workshop staring at the credit chip. It was more money than he had seen in months, earned through work that he barely understood. Ember had curled up on the makeshift bed Jake had created, but the dragon's golden eyes were alert and watching. There was something different in that gaze now, a depth of communication that hadn't been there before their shared work on the quantum containment unit. "You were teaching me, weren't you?" Jake said slowly. "Not just showing off or helping with the repair. You were actually teaching me your knowledge." Ember's response was a complex series of sounds that Jake was beginning to understand carried layers of meaning. Agreement, yes, but also something else. urgency, perhaps. Or warning. Jake activated his workstation's translation software and began researching dragon communication patterns. What he found made his blood run cold. According to the galactic databases, dragons were indeed capable of sharing knowledge directly with other sentient beings, but only under specific circumstances. The dragon had to completely trust the recipient, and the knowledge transfer created a permanent bond between the participants. But, more importantly, dragons only shared their deep knowledge when they sensed approaching danger. It was an ancient survival mechanism, a way of ensuring that their accumulated wisdom would survive even if they didn't. "Ember," Jake said softly, "what aren't you telling me?" The dragon's response was immediate and urgent. A rapid series of chirps and whistles that the translation software identified as expressing concepts related to hunting, capture, and ancient agreements broken. Before Jake could ask more questions, his calm unit chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as unknown, but the message itself made Jake's heart race. "Morrison. You have something that belongs to us. Return it within 24 hours, or face the consequences. This is not a negotiation." The message was accompanied by an image that made Jake's hands shake. It was Ember, but not the small, vulnerable creature he knew. This was clearly an older image, showing Ember alongside other dragons in what looked like some kind of formal ceremony. The other dragons were massive, adult creatures whose presence radiated power and dignity. And every single one of them was wearing what looked suspiciously like restraint collars. Jake looked at Ember, who was now making soft, distressed sounds. The dragon had seen the image too, and its scales had lost their healthy glow, fading to the dull color Jake remembered from their first meeting at the market. "They had you before, didn't they?" Jake said, the pieces beginning to come together. "You escaped, and that's how you ended up in the animal market. But they've been looking for you." Ember's nod was barely perceptible, but unmistakable. Jake's comm unit chimed again. This time the message was from Veltar. "I told you the creature was worthless, Morrison. But my employers have reconsidered. They are now willing to pay considerably more for its return. 10,000 credits, no questions asked. Consider it carefully. My employers are not known for their patience with those who possess their property." Property. Jake felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. Whatever Ember's history with these people, whatever they had done to the dragon before, it was clear that they saw him as nothing more than a valuable object to be owned and controlled. "Over my dead body," Jake muttered, then looked at Ember. "We're not giving up, partner. But I think we need to understand what we're up against." Jake spent the rest of the evening researching everything he could find about dragon ownership, galactic property laws, and the Centauri Trade Consortium. What he discovered painted a grim picture. Dragons were indeed protected as sentient beings once they reached adulthood, but the definition of adulthood was tied to size and demonstrated magical ability rather than age or intelligence. Juveniles could be legally owned and traded, with no protections against abuse or exploitation. The Centauri Trade Consortium had a division that specialized in exotic creature acquisition and training. Their methods were reportedly harsh, designed to break the will of naturally independent creatures and make them completely subservient to their owners. But the most disturbing information Jake found was about dragon knowledge transfer. According to several research papers, dragons possessed inherited memories going back thousands of years. They were living libraries of information about ancient technologies, lost civilizations, and forgotten star charts. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could be incredibly valuable. And incredibly dangerous. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Jake made his decision. Whatever these people wanted with Ember, whatever they had planned for his small friend, they weren't going to get it. Not if Jake had anything to say about it. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was protecting. "Ember," Jake said, settling cross-legged on the floor near the dragon's bed. "I need you to show me what they did to you. I need to understand what we're fighting against." Ember looked at him with those ancient golden eyes for a long moment, then slowly began to glow with that inner fire. But this time, the light carried images, memories shared across the bond they had forged during the repair work. Jake saw flashes of a corporate research facility, sterile and cold. He saw dragons in restraint collars being forced to demonstrate their abilities while researchers took notes. He saw experiments that made his stomach turn, tests designed to push dragon physiology to its limits. And he saw Ember, smaller and younger, trying desperately to help other captive dragons while avoiding the attention of their captors. The images faded, leaving Jake with tears in his eyes and rage in his heart. They were using you. All of you. Harvesting your knowledge and abilities like you were just biological computers. Ember's confirming chirp was soft and sad. Well, they're not getting you back, Jake said firmly. I don't care how much money they have or how many lawyers they can afford. You chose to trust me, and I'm not going to let you down. Outside his workshop, the station continued its endless cycle of commerce and ambition, unaware that in a small repair shop, a human and a dragon were preparing to take a stand that would challenge the very foundations of galactic civilization. Jake Morrison had started the day as a broke mechanic with a mysteriously talented dragon companion. He was ending it as something else entirely, a protector, a partner, and, quite possibly a fugitive. But, as he watched Ember curl up trustingly beside his workbench, Jake knew he had made the right choice. His father would have been proud. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when someone tried to take away the thing a human cared about most. It wasn't going to be pretty. The corporate security team arrived at dawn, moving through the station corridors with the efficient precision of military professionals. Jake watched them from his workshop's security monitor, counting at least 8 heavily armed beings in Centauri Trade Consortium uniforms making their way toward his level. Time to go, he told Ember, who was already gathering small tools and components in what appeared to be a carefully planned evacuation routine. The dragon had been restless all night, clearly sensing the approaching danger through means Jake didn't understand but had learned to trust. Jake had spent the sleepless hours preparing. His portable toolkit was packed with essentials, along with enough credits to keep them mobile for a few days. More importantly, he had made copies of all the data he could find about dragon rights, Centauri Trade Consortium practices, and the legal loopholes that allowed sentient beings to be classified as property. The workshop's back exit led to a maintenance tunnel that connected to the station's cargo handling areas. Jake had used it before when creditors came calling, but never with stakes this high. As they slipped through the narrow passageway, Ember's scales began to pulse with a soft light that provided just enough illumination to navigate safely. You've done this before, haven't you? Jake whispered. The escaping part, I mean. Ember's response was a quiet trill that somehow conveyed both confirmation and sadness. The dragon had escaped before, probably multiple times, only to be recaptured each time. But this time was different. This time, Ember wasn't alone. They emerged in Bay 94, a cargo area that mostly handled automated freight transfers. The morning shift wouldn't start for another hour, giving them time to figure out their next move. Jake found a hiding spot behind a stack of shipping containers and pulled out his comm unit. Sarah, he said when Captain Chen answered. I need a favor. A big one. What's wrong, Jake? You sound scared. Jake glanced at Ember, who was scanning the cargo bay with obvious tactical awareness. Remember how I told you Ember was special? Well, it turns out some very powerful people want him back, and they're not taking no for an answer. There was a pause. Jake, are you in trouble with the consortium? Because if you are, I can't afford to get involved. My family's shipping license, I know what I'm asking, Jake interrupted. But these people aren't just after Ember. They're running illegal experiments on sentient beings. Dragons, Sarah. Creatures as intelligent as you or me, being treated like lab equipment. Another pause, longer this time. Where are you now? Cargo Bay 94. Corporate security is searching my workshop as we speak. Stay put. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The Chen family freighter arrived exactly on schedule, its engines running nearly silent thanks to yesterday's repairs. Sarah opened the cargo ramp without shutting down the engines, clearly ready to leave immediately. Get aboard, she called out. But, Jake, I want you to know this is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done. Welcome to the club, Jake replied, helping Ember up the ramp. The dragon moved with obvious relief, as if being inside a spacecraft felt like safety rather than confinement. As the freighter lifted off from station Kepler 442b, Jake watched through the viewport as Centauri security teams swarmed his workshop. He felt a pang of loss for the tools and equipment he had left behind, the familiar space where he had spent years building his reputation as an honest mechanic. But then, Ember made a soft sound of comfort and pressed against his side, and Jake realized he wasn't losing anything important. He was gaining something infinitely more valuable. "So what's the plan?" Sarah asked from the pilot's seat. "Because run away and hide isn't going to work against a major corporation. They have resources we can't match." Jake pulled out the data files he had compiled during his research. "Actually, I think they might have more to lose than we do. Look at this." He showed Sarah the evidence he had gathered about Centauri's illegal dragon experimentation program. The documents were carefully encrypted and buried in bureaucratic language, but the pattern was clear. The corporation was systematically acquiring young dragons, exploiting their inherited knowledge for commercial gain, and disposing of them when they became too difficult to control. "This is monster-level stuff," Sarah said, scrolling through the files. "If this got out to the Galactic Ethics Council, it would destroy them." "But how do we prove it? These documents could be faked, and they'll claim your dragon is just a well-trained animal." That's when Ember made a series of complex sounds that Jake was beginning to understand carried multiple layers of meaning. The dragon wasn't just communicating with Jake anymore, it was trying to tell them both something important. Jake activated the ship's translation software, but Ember shook its head in frustration. The standard programs weren't sophisticated enough to handle dragon communication. Instead, Ember moved to the ship's main computer interface and began working with the same precision it had shown during the quantum containment repair. Within minutes, the dragon had somehow modified the translation protocols, creating a customized interface that could interpret its vocalizations into standard galactic language. Testing, came a voice from the ship's speakers. It was clearly synthetic, but underneath the mechanical tones, Jake could hear something that sounded unmistakably like Ember. "Can you understand me now?" Sarah nearly dropped the controls. "It can talk. The dragon can actually talk." "I could always communicate," Ember replied with what Jake thought might be amusement. "You simply lacked the proper interface. Dragons and humans do not share the same vocal structures, but we can adapt to technological mediation." Jake stared at his small companion with new appreciation. "How long have you understood everything we've been saying?" "Since the moment you chose to purchase my freedom rather than accept the payment offered for my capture," Ember said. "I have been listening, learning, and evaluating. You are not like the others who have owned me, Jake Morrison. You treat me as a partner rather than property. This is rare among the galactic community." "Others have owned you before," Sarah said. "How many others?" Ember's pause was heavy with old pain. 17 different facilities over the course of 3 standard years. Each time they promised better treatment, better conditions. Each time they lied. "What did they want from you?" "Knowledge," Ember replied simply. "Dragons carry the accumulated memories of our species. Star charts to worlds that have been lost for millennia. Technical specifications for technologies that predate most current civilizations. Historical records of events that shaped galactic development. To humans and other species, we are living databases of incalculable value." Jake felt sick. "They were stealing your memories." "Attempting to," Ember corrected. "Dragons cannot be forced to share deep knowledge. It must be given freely, in the context of mutual trust and respect. This is why the corporations use increasingly harsh methods to break our will. They believe that sufficient suffering will eventually make us compliant." "But you never gave them what they wanted." "I gave them enough to survive," Ember said quietly. "Surface knowledge, technical skills, basic information that kept me valuable enough to keep alive. But never the deep memories. Never the truly important knowledge. That is reserved for those who earn it through genuine partnership." Sarah was staring at the translation interface with obvious amazement. "Jake, do you understand what this means? You have a witness. A sentient witness who can testify about illegal experiments and forced labor. This isn't just evidence, it's a smoking gun. If we can get into the right people, Jake replied. But Centauri has influence throughout this sector. They'll claim Ember is just a sophisticated AI program or trained animal. We need more than just his testimony. That's when Ember made a sound that the translation software interpreted as excitement. Jake, there are others. Other dragons being held by Centauri and their subsidiaries. If we could free them, if we could gather multiple witnesses. That's impossible, Sarah said immediately. We're talking about breaking into corporate facilities, probably guarded by military-grade security. It's suicide. But Jake was thinking about the knowledge transfer he had experienced during the quantum containment repair. If Ember could download information directly into his mind, perhaps other dragons could share their experiences too. A whole network of witnesses, their memories preserved and protected even if the corporations tried to silence them. Where are they? Jake asked. The other dragons. Do you know? Ember's scales pulsed with that inner fire, and, suddenly, the ship's navigation display activated, showing a star map with multiple locations highlighted. I can sense them, the dragon explained. Dragons are connected through what you might call a psychic network. We can feel each other's distress across vast distances. There are currently 43 of my kind in various forms of captivity throughout this sector. 43, Sarah repeated in a stunned voice. They're running an entire industry based on enslaving sentient beings. Jake studied the star map, noting that several of the highlighted locations were major corporate facilities with heavy security. But a few were smaller operations, research stations and testing facilities that might be more vulnerable. Sarah, I need you to take us to the nearest research station on this list. It's time to start evening the odds. Jake, this is crazy. We're talking about taking on one of the largest corporations in the galaxy. We have one small freighter and a dragon who weighs maybe 30 pounds. They have fleets of warships and armies of security personnel. They also have a secret that could destroy them if it gets out, Jake replied. And they've made one critical mistake. Which is? Jake looked at Ember, who was watching the conversation with obvious intelligence and determination. They assumed that because dragons are small and physically vulnerable, they're helpless. But Ember just modified our ship's computer systems in a matter of minutes, and taught me quantum engineering techniques that shouldn't be possible with our equipment. I'm starting to think that individual dragons might be a lot more dangerous than anyone realizes. You are correct, Ember said, and there was something in the synthetic voice that sent chills down Jake's spine. Dragons are not helpless. We simply choose not to use our full capabilities unless absolutely necessary. But, Jake Morrison, you have shown me something I had forgotten during my years in captivity. You have shown me that there are still beings in this galaxy who understand the difference between ownership and partnership. What are you saying? I am saying that I am no longer trying to simply survive until rescue arrives. I am saying that with the right partner, a dragon can accomplish things that would surprise even our captors. And I am saying that perhaps it is time for my kind to remind the galaxy why our ancestors were once feared as well as respected. The ship's lights dimmed momentarily as power flowed through systems Jake hadn't even known existed. When the illumination returned, the display showed weapons systems and defensive capabilities that shouldn't have been possible on a civilian cargo hauler. Where did those come from? Sarah demanded. They were always there, Ember replied calmly. Hidden beneath civilian programming, waiting for someone who could activate them properly. This ship was built during the corporate wars, when merchants needed to defend themselves against pirates and raiders. The weapons were simply deactivated and concealed, not removed. Jake stared at his small companion with new understanding. You've been planning this. From the moment I bought your freedom, you've been planning to go after the others. I have been hoping, Ember corrected. Planning requires a partner worthy of trust. Someone who would choose principle over profit, courage over safety. I have been waiting for someone like you, Jake Morrison. As the Chen family freighter adjusted course toward the first rescue target, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a broke mechanic trying to survive. He was part of something larger, something that could change the fundamental balance of power in this part of the galaxy. But he was also scared. The corporations they were about to challenge had resources that dwarfed anything a small crew could muster. They had legal departments that could twist any law to their advantage, and security forces that could make inconvenient people disappear without a trace. "Ember," he said quietly. "What if we fail? What if this gets us all killed?" The dragon's response came not through the translation system, but through the knowledge-sharing bond they had established. Jake suddenly understood, with crystal clarity, the memories of 43 dragons scattered across the sector. Their fear, their pain, their desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would remember that they were people, not property. "Then, we fail trying," Jake said aloud, answering his own question. "But, at least we fail as partners, not as owner and owned." "Exactly," Ember replied through the speakers. "And, Jake Morrison, I do not believe we will fail. You see, there is something the corporations do not understand about dragon knowledge. They believe it is simply information to be extracted and used. But, true dragon knowledge is not passive data. It is living wisdom, accumulated over millennia and shared only with those who demonstrate genuine honor." "What kind of wisdom?" Ember's scales pulsed brighter. "The kind that once helped a primitive species called humanity find its way to the stars. The kind that has been waiting for 300 years for humans to remember who they used to be before greed made them forget their better nature. The kind that is about to remind the galaxy why dragons and humans were once the most feared partnership in known space." Jake felt history shifting around them, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The first rescue mission was 12 hours away. Time enough to prepare, to plan, and to hope that a broke mechanic and a 3-credit dragon could accomplish what armies and governments had failed to do. Time enough to discover whether partnership was stronger than power, or if the galaxy's predators would continue to prey on the innocent. Either way, Jake Morrison was about to find out what kind of man he really was. The Centauri research station Delta 7 hung in the void like a metallic spider, its multiple arms extending into space to house different experimental facilities. Jake studied the schematic that Ember had somehow extracted from the station's own security databases, marveling at both the dragon's technical abilities and the casual arrogance of a facility that believed itself untouchable. 17 dragons, Ember reported through the ship's communication system. All juveniles by legal classification, though several are older than the average human lifespan. They are being held in Research Wing C, Sublevel 4. "Guards?" Sarah asked from the pilot's station. Her initial reluctance had gradually shifted to grim determination as Ember had shared more details about the conditions at various Centauri facilities. "Minimal human security on that level," Ember replied. "The corporations rely primarily on automated systems and the assumption that dragons are too physically weak to pose a threat. They are about to discover how mistaken that assumption is." Jake checked his equipment one more time. The portable tools he had salvaged from his workshop, emergency medical supplies for injured dragons, and a recording device that would capture evidence of the illegal experimentation program. It wasn't much for a mission this dangerous, but Ember had assured him that dragons were remarkably resilient once freed from their restraints. "The real challenge won't be getting in," Jake said, reviewing their plan. "It'll be getting 17 frightened dragons out of a hostile facility and onto our ship without triggering every alarm in the sector." "Leave that to me," Ember said, and Jake heard something in the synthesized voice that hadn't been there before. Authority. Command presence. For the first time, Jake caught a glimpse of what Ember might become when fully mature. The approach to Delta 7 had been carefully planned. Sarah's shipping credentials gave them legitimate reason to dock at the station's cargo facilities, and Ember had modified their transponder codes to show them carrying machine parts rather than passengers. A routine delivery that would attract no special attention. But, as they drew closer to the station, Jake felt his nerves tightening. This wasn't fixing engines or standing up to bullies. This was breaking into a corporate facility to steal what the law considered valuable property. If they were caught, the charges would be serious enough to put them away for decades. "Jake," Ember said quietly through their private communication channel. "I need you to understand something before we begin. What we are about to do will change you. Not just the legal consequences, but the knowledge I will need to share with you to make this mission possible. Once you have true dragon knowledge in your mind, you can never go back to being simply human. What do you mean? Dragons live for thousands of years, Jake. Our memories span centuries. When I share deep knowledge with you, you will experience some of those memories as if they were your own. You will understand the galaxy's history from a perspective no human has ever had. It will be overwhelming. Jake thought about that for a moment, watching the research station grow larger on their viewscreen. Will it change who I am? My personality, my values? No, Ember replied. It will only change what you know. But knowledge has weight, Jake Morrison. The weight of truth about how this galaxy really functions, about the suffering that corporate profits are built upon, about the potential for something better that most beings never even imagine. And if I can't handle it? Then we fail, and 17 of my kind remain in captivity while we become fugitives for the rest of our short lives. Jake closed his eyes and thought about his father, about the man who had taught him that character was defined by choices made when no one was watching. Do it. The knowledge transfer was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. It wasn't like learning in school or reading technical manuals. It was like suddenly remembering things he had always known but somehow forgotten. He saw the galaxy as it had been centuries ago, when younger civilizations first reached for the stars with wonder instead of greed. He experienced the gradual corruption of exploration into exploitation, the slow transformation of discovery into domination. He felt the accumulated pain of countless species who had been classified as property rather than people. But he also saw hope. Moments when individuals chose compassion over profit, when entire civilizations rejected the easy path of oppression in favor of harder but more honorable choices. He understood that the galaxy's current state wasn't inevitable, that it could be changed by people willing to take risks for something better. When the transfer was complete, Jake opened his eyes and found himself looking at Delta 7 with entirely new perception. He could see the energy patterns flowing through the station's hull, identify the weak points in its security grid, and understand the psychological profiles of the researchers who worked there. How do you feel? Ember asked. Like I've been living in a very small room my entire life and someone just opened all the windows, Jake replied. And like I understand why you've been fighting so hard to save the others. Good. Then, you are ready. The docking process went smoothly. Sarah's shipping credentials were accepted without question, and they were assigned a cargo bay in the lower levels of the station. Jake and Ember disembarked while Sarah remained with the ship, ready to provide emergency extraction if things went wrong. Moving through the station's corridors, Jake marveled at how differently he perceived everything now. The subtle signs of stress in the facility's crew, the barely contained violence in the security protocols, the casual dehumanization built into every aspect of the research programs. This place is a factory for suffering, he said quietly to Ember. Yes, the dragon replied through their private comlink. And we are about to shut it down. The route to Research Wing C took them through several security checkpoints, but Ember's modifications to the station's computer systems made them effectively invisible to automated scanners. The few human guards they encountered saw exactly what the dragon wanted them to see, a maintenance worker and his animal companion performing routine inspections. Sublevel 4 was worse than Jake had imagined. The dragons were housed in individual cells barely large enough for them to turn around, each one monitored by sensors that recorded every movement and vocalization. Most of the creatures appeared listless and defeated, their scales dull with poor nutrition and lack of stimulation. But when Ember entered the containment area, everything changed. The imprisoned dragons immediately became alert, their scales beginning to glow with shared excitement and hope. Jake heard sounds he had never experienced before, a complex harmony of dragon voices that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple communication. They're singing, Jake said in wonder. They are sharing strength, Ember corrected. Reminding each other that they are not alone, that rescue has come. The containment cells were secured with quantum locks that should have been impossible to override without proper authorization codes. But Ember approached each one with calm confidence, somehow manipulating the locking mechanisms through methods Jake couldn't follow even with his enhanced knowledge. The freed dragons emerged cautiously at first, then, with growing excitement as they realized this wasn't another cruel experiment. They gathered around Ember, touching noses and making soft sounds that Jake understood were expressions of gratitude and relief. But their celebration was cut short by the wail of emergency alarms throughout the facility. "Security breach in Research Wing C," announced an automated voice. "All personnel evacuate immediately. Containment has been compromised." Jake's enhanced perception immediately understood what had happened. The quantum locks had built-in tamper alerts that triggered when too many were opened in sequence. Their invisible approach had been discovered. "How long before security arrives?" he asked Ember. 3 minutes, the Dragon replied after consulting the station's security protocols. "But, Jake, there is a problem. These dragons are too weak to fly, and several are injured. We cannot move them quickly enough to reach our ship." Jake looked at the 17 freed dragons, noting the obvious signs of malnutrition and medical neglect. Some could barely stand, let alone navigate the complex route back to their docking bay. "Then, we make them come to us," he said, an idea forming in his mind. "Can you access the station's environmental controls?" "Yes, but shut down artificial gravity in this section. Make it so they have to use emergency protocols to reach us." Ember's scales pulsed as the Dragon interfaced with the station's computer systems. Within seconds, Jake felt his feet leave the deck plating as the artificial gravity generators went offline. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Emergency lighting activated, evacuation procedures began, and the station's crew found themselves dealing with a facility-wide crisis instead of a simple security breach. In the confusion, 17 dragons and 2 humans began making their way toward the docking bays using emergency handholds and ventilation shafts. But the reprieve was temporary. Corporate security forces were trained for exactly this kind of emergency, and they adapted quickly to zero-gravity conditions. Jake could hear them moving through the corridors, getting closer with each passing minute. "Sarah," he called over the comms system. "We need immediate extraction. Bay 7, and we're coming in hot." "Standing by," Sarah replied. "But, Jake, there are corporate warships moving into the system. Big ones. Whatever you've done, it's attracted some serious attention." Jake helped 2 of the weaker dragons navigate a particularly difficult junction, marveling at how quickly they adapted to zero gravity despite their weakened condition. Dragons, he realized, were naturally three-dimensional thinkers, equally comfortable in any orientation. "How are the others doing?" he asked Ember. "Better than expected. Freedom is a powerful medicine." "But, Jake, I need to tell you something about those warships Sarah detected." "What about them?" "They are not here for us. They are here to destroy the evidence. Centauri is implementing what they call the Scorched Earth Protocol. They would rather lose this entire facility than risk exposure of their experimentation program." Jake felt ice in his veins. "They're going to blow up the station? With everyone still aboard? Researchers, security personnel, civilian contractors. Everyone who might potentially testify about what they witnessed here. How long do we have?" "Unknown, but the warships will need time to evacuate key personnel and sensitive equipment. Perhaps 30 minutes. They reached the docking bay to find Sarah already running pre-flight sequences. The freed dragons streamed aboard the cargo freighter with obvious relief, though Jake noticed several of them immediately began working on the ship's systems, apparently making modifications and improvements without being asked. "What are they doing?" Sarah called out as dragons swarmed over her control panels. "Making sure we survive the next few minutes," Ember replied. "Jake, I need you to understand something. These 17 dragons represent nearly 2 centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience. Together, we can do things that no single dragon could accomplish alone." "What kind of things?" Instead of answering, Ember and the other dragons began working in concert, their scales pulsing in synchronized patterns that reminded Jake of a computer network sharing data at incredible speed. The ship's engines hummed with new efficiency, defensive systems came online that Jake hadn't known existed, and the navigation computer displayed course options that seemed to violate several laws of physics. "Hang on," Sarah called out as she initiated launch sequences. "This is going to get rough." The freighter lifted off from Delta 7 just as corporate security forces reached the docking bay. Energy beams lanced through space around them, but somehow none found their target. The ship seemed to move with an almost prescient awareness of incoming fire, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to anticipate.
How are we doing that? Jake asked, watching impossible maneuvers on the navigation display.
Dragons dream of flying, Ember explained.
Even in captivity, we never stop dreaming.
Give us a ship to work with, and we can make it dance among the stars. But their escape was only the beginning of the challenge. The corporate warships were massive, heavily armed, and designed for exactly this kind of pursuit. On the main view screen, Jake watched as Delta 7 erupted in a brilliant explosion, taking with it any evidence of illegal experimentation and any witnesses who might have testified. They just murdered their own people, Sarah said in shock. Standard procedure, Ember replied with bitter acceptance.
Centauri considers its employees as expendable as its test subjects.
But, Jake, they have made a critical error.
Which is? They assume that destroying the evidence will eliminate the threat. But, we are not evidence. We are witnesses.
And, now, thanks to your decision to free all 17 dragons, we are 17 witnesses who can share their experiences directly with anyone willing to listen.
Will that be enough to stop them?
Ember was quiet for a moment, consulting with the other dragons through their network connection.
It will be enough to change everything.
But, first, we must survive long enough to share what we know. The corporate warships were gaining on them, their superior speed and firepower making escape seem impossible. But, Jake noticed that the dragons weren't showing any signs of panic.
If anything, they seemed to be preparing for something. Ember, what aren't you telling me?
Jake Morrison, the dragon replied formally, you have proven yourself worthy of the deepest trust a dragon can offer. You have sacrificed your safety and your future to rescue beings you barely knew, asking nothing in return except partnership. You have shown honor in a galaxy that has largely forgotten what honor means.
What are you saying? I am saying that the time for hiding is over. The time for pretending to be helpless is over.
You wanted to know what dragons are truly capable of when we are free and unrestrained. The ship shuddered as energy beams from the pursuing warships found their target. Alarms blared throughout the cargo hold, and Jake felt the deck plating vibrate ominously under his feet.
Sarah, damage report.
Shields at 60% and falling.
They're too fast, Jake. We can't outrun them. That's when the dragons stopped hiding what they really were.
17 voices joined in harmony, not the simple communication Jake had heard before, but something deeper and more primal. The song of dragons in battle, echoing across space itself. Jake felt the sound in his bones, in his DNA, awakening something that humanity had forgotten over centuries of technological advancement. The freighter began to glow. Not just the engines or the weapons systems, but the entire hull began radiating energy that transformed the small cargo ship into something that belonged in legends rather than reality. When the corporate warships fired again, their energy beams simply dispersed against barriers that shouldn't have been possible.
What's happening to our ship? Sarah demanded.
It is remembering what it was meant to be, Ember replied.
All technology dreams, Sarah Chen. Dreams of fulfilling its true purpose. Dragons simply help technology remember those dreams.
The transformed freighter accelerated past the warships as if they were standing still, leaving the corporate fleet behind like an adult outrunning children. But Jake understood that this was more than just superior speed.
They weren't just moving through space anymore.
They were moving through possibility itself, following paths between stars that existed only in dragon dreams and human imagination working together.
Where are we going? Jake asked.
To show the galaxy what partnership between dragons and humans can accomplish, Ember replied.
To the Galactic Ethics Council, where 17 witnesses will testify about what we have seen and experienced.
And then, if they are wise enough to listen, to wherever the galaxy needs us most. Jake looked around the cargo hold at the 17 dragons who had gone from prisoners to partners in the span of a few hours. Each one was unique, with different colors and patterns, different specialties and knowledge. But they all shared the same expression of hope that Jake had first seen in Ember's golden eyes. This is just the beginning, isn't it? He said.
Yes, Ember replied.
The galaxy is about to rediscover what it means when dragons and humans choose to work together instead of one dominating the other. It is going to be magnificent. As their transformed ship raced toward the core systems where the Galactic Ethics Council maintained its headquarters, Jake Morrison realized that his life as a simple mechanic was over forever. He was part of something larger now, something that would change the balance of power throughout known space. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He was excited. The galaxy was about to learn what 3 credits could buy when spent with honor instead of greed. It was about to discover that some things were worth more than money, more valuable than power, more important than profit. It was about to remember what partnership really meant. The Galactic Ethics Council chambers had never witnessed anything like the testimony of 17 liberated dragons. For 3 days, representatives from across known space listened in growing amazement and horror as each dragon shared their memories through the translation interface Ember had perfected. Jake sat in the witness gallery, watching as beings who had been classified as property just days before commanded the attention of the most powerful governmental body in the galaxy. The dragons spoke with dignity and precision, their accounts supported by technical data that proved the scope of Centauri's illegal experimentation program. "The evidence is overwhelming," declared Council Chair Valdres, a tall, crystalline being whose species had helped establish galactic civilization's ethical frameworks. "The systematic abuse of sentient beings, the violation of consciousness protection laws, the destruction of evidence and murder of witnesses. Centauri Trade Consortium will face justice for these crimes." But Jake knew that legal victory was only the beginning. Around the galaxy, other corporations were already moving to cover up their own illegal operations. The dragons had freed themselves from one facility, but thousands of others remained in captivity throughout known space. That's when Ember approached the council with a proposal that would change everything. "Honorable representatives," the dragon said through the chamber's enhanced translation system, "my companions and I offer our partnership to the Galactic Ethics Council in establishing a new enforcement division." Dragons possess capabilities that would make such work highly effective, while humans have demonstrated the moral courage necessary to take action when others would look away. Council Chair Valdres tilted her crystalline head thoughtfully. "What kind of partnership are you proposing?" "Dragon-human teams, working together to investigate and expose illegal operations throughout the galaxy. Dragons can interface with any technology, access secure databases, and share knowledge instantly across vast distances. Humans provide mobility, legal authority, and the unique ability to make moral choices even when they conflict with immediate self-interest." "You're talking about creating an entirely new kind of law enforcement," observed Counselor Threx, a veteran administrator from the Proxima Collective. "The legal implications alone would be staggering." "The legal implications of doing nothing are far worse," Ember replied firmly. "How many more facilities like Delta 7 exist throughout the galaxy? How many more sentient beings are being classified as property while we debate jurisdictional details?" Jake felt a surge of pride watching his small partner address the most powerful beings in known space with calm authority. But he also understood what Ember was really proposing. Not just justice for the dragons, but a fundamental restructuring of how galactic civilization dealt with exploitation and abuse. "This council would need to see a demonstration of these claimed capabilities," said Councillor Valdres. "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." Ember's scales pulsed with that inner fire Jake had learned to recognize as excitement. "I believe that can be arranged." What followed was the most impressive display of coordinated ability Jake had ever witnessed. The 17 dragons connected to the Council's computer networks simultaneously, pulling data from across the galaxy and compiling a comprehensive map of illegal operations in real time. Within hours, they had identified 47 separate facilities conducting unauthorized experimentation on sentient beings. They located corporate shell companies hiding behind layers of false documentation. They traced financial networks that funneled profits from slave labor into supposedly legitimate businesses. But, most impressively, they did it all while demonstrating perfect respect for legitimate privacy rights and legal boundaries. The dragons proved they could access any information necessary for their investigations while scrupulously avoiding data they had no right to examine. "Remarkable," admitted Councillor Valdres. But, even with these capabilities, how would such teams operate in practice? The logistics alone would be challenging. Jake stood up from the witness gallery, understanding that this was his moment to speak. "If I may, Counselor, I'd like to volunteer for the first human dragon enforcement team." The chamber fell silent as hundreds of beings turned to look at the grease-stained mechanic who had started this entire chain of events. Jake felt the weight of their attention but also the steady presence of Ember's support through their mental link. "Mr. Morrison," said Counselor Valdres, "you have already done more than anyone could reasonably expect. You've sacrificed your livelihood and risked your life to expose these crimes. Are you certain you want to take on even greater responsibilities?" Jake thought about his father's words about character being defined by choices made when no one was watching. But now, everyone was watching. The entire galaxy was waiting to see what kind of person he really was. "Respectfully, Counselor, I think the question isn't whether I want to take on these responsibilities. The question is whether I can live with myself if I walk away when there's still work to be done." He gestured toward the other 16 dragons, who were watching the proceedings with obvious hope. "These beings trusted me when they had every reason not to. They've shared their knowledge, their abilities, and their friendship without asking for anything except respect in return. How could I abandon them now?" "And what about the dangers?" asked Counselor Threx. "Corporate interests will not simply accept this new enforcement paradigm. They will fight back, probably violently." "Then, we'll be ready," Jake replied. "Dragons and humans working together have already proven we can handle whatever they throw at us. But, more importantly, we've proven we can do it while maintaining our principles. We didn't become the enemy to fight the enemy." Ember moved to stand beside Jake, scales glowing with approval. "The partnership Mr. Morrison describes is not theoretical. It already exists. We have already demonstrated its effectiveness. The only question remaining is whether this council has the wisdom to support it officially." The vote was closer than Jake had expected, but the final tally was decisive. The Galactic Ethics Council authorized the creation of the Special Enforcement Division, with dragon-human teams granted unprecedented authority to investigate violations of sentient rights throughout known space. Jake Morrison became the first human agent in the new division, partnered permanently with Ember and supported by a network of dragons whose combined knowledge spanned millennia of galactic history. Their first official mission came just weeks later. The luxury resort world of Paradiso Prime advertised itself as the ultimate vacation destination, where wealthy clients could experience exotic adventures unavailable anywhere else in the galaxy. But intelligence reports suggested that some of those exotic adventures involved sentient beings forced to perform for entertainment. Jake and Ember's investigation uncovered a horrific reality. The resort's management had constructed elaborate hunting preserves where corporate executives could pursue intelligent prey, gladiatorial arenas where enslaved beings fought for survival, and breeding programs designed to produce beings with specific traits for various forms of entertainment. But this time, they weren't working alone. 3 other dragon-human teams had been deployed simultaneously, coordinating their efforts through the dragon's natural communication network. When they struck, they did so with precision and overwhelming force. The liberation of Paradiso Prime freed over 200 enslaved beings and exposed a criminal network that extended throughout the luxury entertainment industry. More importantly, it demonstrated that the new enforcement model could tackle challenges that traditional authorities had found impossible to address. The corporate response was swift and vicious. Centauri Trade Consortium and its allies launched a propaganda campaign denouncing the Special Enforcement Division as vigilantes who threatened the economic stability of galactic civilization. They hired private military companies to protect their remaining illegal operations. They offered massive bounties for the capture of enforcement team members. But they had made one critical miscalculation. Dragons, Jake discovered, had very long memories and very little patience for beings who hurt their friends. The corporate offensive lasted exactly 17 days. During that time, dragon-human enforcement teams dismantled financial networks that had operated in secret for decades, exposed corruption in governmental agencies throughout multiple sectors, and liberated enslaved beings from facilities that had hidden behind legitimate business fronts. They did it all with minimal violence, surgical precision, and absolute respect for legal authorities in each jurisdiction. But they also did it with implacable determination that proved corporate wealth and influence were no match for partnership based on genuine mutual respect. Jake found himself thinking often about the moment in that alien marketplace when he had chosen to spend his last 3 credits on a creature that needed help.
At the time, it had seemed like simple decency, the kind of small kindness that any reasonable person might offer.
Now, 6 months later, that decision had reshaped galactic civilization. The Special Enforcement Division had grown to include 47 dragon-human teams, supported by a network of thousands of liberated dragons who had chosen to contribute their knowledge and abilities to the cause of justice. Slavery and forced experimentation hadn't been eliminated, but they were no longer ignored.
Corporate criminals could no longer hide behind legal technicalities and jurisdictional boundaries.
Most importantly, the galaxy had rediscovered what partnership could accomplish when it was based on equality rather than domination.
Do you ever miss it? Amber asked one evening as they traveled toward their next assignment.
They were aboard a new ship now, one designed specifically for their needs and equipped with technologies that merged dragon knowledge with human engineering in ways that shouldn't have been possible.
Miss what?
Jake replied, though he suspected he knew what his partner meant.
The simple life.
Fixing engines, solving mechanical problems, going home to a quiet workshop at the end of the day.
Jake considered the question seriously. Their current mission involved investigating reports of illegal neuromodification experiments on 3 different worlds simultaneously.
The scope of the investigation was staggering, the potential dangers enormous, and the political implications could destabilize an entire sector government. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes challenge he would have found terrifying just months ago. Sometimes, he admitted, there's something to be said for problems that can be solved with the right tools and enough patience.
But, Amber, I think I was only hiding in that simple life. Avoiding the bigger problems because they seemed too